This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recorded by J.C. Guan, Montreal, May 2007. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 7. The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the salon than he assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. Now, in spite of the mobility of his countenance, the command of which, like a finished actor, he had carefully studied before the glass, it was by no means easy for him to assume an air of judicial severity. Except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted, and which might interfere unless he acted with the greatest prudence with his own career, Gérard de Villefort was as happy as a man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation, though only 27. He was about to marry a young and charming woman, whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as became a deputy attorney of the king. And besides her personal attractions, which were very great, Mademoiselle de Saint Méran's family possessed considerable political influence, which they would, of course, exert in his favour. The dowry of his wife amounted to 50,000 crowns, and he had besides the prospect of seeing her fortune increased to 500,000 at her father's death. These considerations naturally gave Villefort a feeling of such complete felicity that his mind was fairly dazzled in its contemplation. At the door he met the commissary of police, who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face, as we have before described, and said, "I have read the letters, sir, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy." "We know nothing as yet of the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers found have been sealed up and placed on your desk. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantès, mate on board the Three Master de Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandria and Smyrna, and belonging to Morel and Son, of Marseille. Before he entered the merchant service, has he ever served in the marines?" "Oh, no, monsieur, he is very young." "How old?" 19 or 20 at the most." At this moment, and as Villefort had arrived at the corner of the Rue des Conseils, a man who seemed to have been waiting for him approached. It was Monsieur Morel. "Ah, Monsieur de Villefort," cried he, "I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantès, mate of my vessel." "I know it, monsieur," replied Villefort, "and I am now going to examine him." "Oh," said Morel, carried away by his friendship, "you do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy creature in the world, and I will venture to say there is not a better seaman in all the merchant service. Oh, Monsieur de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him." Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseille, Morel to the plebeian. The first was a royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morel, and replied, "You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be estimable and trustworthy in private life, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true?" The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, while his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of one who, interceding for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on politics. Besides, what Dantès had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal, and what the Emperor had said to him, embarrassed him. He replied, however, "I entreat you, Monsieur de Villefort, be as you always are kind and equitable, and give him back to us soon." This gave us sounded revolutionary in the deputy's ears. "Ah, ah," murmured he, "is Dantès then a member of some Carbonari society, that his protector thus employs the collective form? He was, if I recollect, arrested in a tavern, in company of a great many others." Then he added, "Monsieur, you may rest assured I shall perform my duty impartially, and that if he be innocent, you shall not have appealed to me in vain. Should he, however, be guilty, in this present epoch, immunity would furnish a dangerous example, and I must do my duty." As he had now arrived at the door of his own house, which adjoined the Palais de Justice, he entered after having coldly saluted the shipowner, who stood, as if petrified, on the spot where Villefort had left him. The antechamber was full of police agents and gendarmes, in the midst of whom, carefully watched, but calm and smiling, stood the prisoner. Villefort traversed the antechamber, cast a side glance at Dantès, and taking a packet which a gendarme offered him, disappeared, saying, "Bring the prisoner." Rapid as had been Villefort's glance, it had served to give him an idea of the man he was about to interrogate. He had recognized intelligence in the high forehead, courage in the dark eye and bent brow, and frankness in the thick lips that showed a set of pearly teeth. Villefort's first impression was favorable, but he had been so often warned to mistrust first impulses, that he applied the maxim to the impression, forgetting the difference between the two words. He stifled, therefore, the feelings of compassion that were rising, composed his features, and sat down, grim and sombre, at his desk. An instant after Dantès entered. He was pale but calm and collected, and saluting his judge with easy politeness, looked round for a seat, as if he had been in M. Morrel's salon. It was then that he encountered the first time Villefort's look, that look peculiar to the magistrate, who, while seeming to read the thoughts of others, betrays nothing of his own. "Who and what are you?" demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers containing information relative to the prisoner that a police agent had given to him on his entry, and that already in an hour's time had swelled to voluminous proportions, thanks to the corrupt espionage of which the accused is always made the victim. "My name is Edmond Dantès," replied the young man calmly. "I am mate of the Pharaon, belonging to Messieurs Morel and Son." "Your age?" continued Villefort. "19," returned Dantès. "What were you doing at the moment you were arrested?" "I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur," said the young man, his voice slightly tremulous. So great was the contrast between that happy moment and the painful ceremony he was now undergoing. So great was the contrast between the sombre aspect of Monsieur de Villefort and the radiant face of Mercédès. "You were at the festival of your marriage," said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. "Yes, monsieur. I am on the point of marrying a young girl I have been attached to for 3 years." Villefort, impassive as he was struck with this coincidence, and the tremulous voice of Dantès, surprised in the midst of his happiness, struck a sympathetic chord in his own bosom. He also was on the point of being married, and he was summoned from his own happiness to destroy that of another. This philosophic reflection, thought he, will make a great sensation at M. de Saint Méran's, and he arranged mentally, while Dantès awaited further questions, the antithesis by which orators often create a reputation for eloquence. When the speech was arranged, Villefort turned to Dantès. "Go on, sir," said he. "What would you have me say?" "Give all the information in your power." "Tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell all I know. Only," added he with a smile, "I warn you I know very little. Have you served under the usurper? I was about to be mustered into the Royal Marines when he fell." "It is reported your political opinions are extreme," said Villefort, who had never heard anything of the kind, but was not sorry to make this inquiry, as if it were an accusation. "My political opinions," replied Dantès. "Alas, sir, I never had any opinions. I am hardly 19. I know nothing. I have no part to play. If I obtain the situation I desire, I shall owe it to M. Morel. Thus all my opinions, I will not say public but private, are confined to these 3 sentiments. I love my father, I respect M. Morel, and I adore Mercédès. This, sir, is all I can tell you, and you see how uninteresting it is." As Dantès spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenuous and open countenance, and recollected the words of Renée, who, without knowing who the culprit was, had besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent, with that eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody, because he was happy, and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended his affection even to his judge, in spite of Villefort's severe look and stern accent. Dantès seemed full of kindness. "Pardieu," said Villefort, "he is a noble fellow. I hope I shall gain Renée's favor easily by obeying the first command she ever imposed on me. I shall have at least a pressure of the hand in public, and a sweet kiss in private." Full of this idea, Villefort's face became so joyous that when he turned to Dantès, the latter, who had watched the change on his physiognomy, was smiling also. "Sir," said Villefort, "have you any enemies, at least that you know?" "I have enemies?" replied Dantès. "My position is not sufficiently elevated for that. As for my disposition, that is perhaps somewhat too hasty, but I have striven to repress it. I have had 10 or 12 sailors under me, and if you question them they will tell you that they love and respect me not as a father, for I am too young, but as an elder brother. But you may have excited jealousy. You are about to become captain at 19, an elevated post. You are about to marry a pretty girl, who loves you, and these 2 pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of someone. You are right, you know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess, but if such persons are among my acquaintances, I prefer not to know it, because then I should be forced to hate them. You are wrong. You should always strive to see clearly around you. You seem a worthy young man. I will depart from the strict line of my duty to aid you in discovering the author of this accusation. Here is the paper. Do you know the writing?" As he spoke, Villefort drew the letter from his pocket and presented it to Dantès. Dantès read it. A cloud passed over his brow as he said, "No, monsieur, I do not know the writing, and yet it is tolerably plain. Whoever did it writes well. I am very fortunate," added he, looking gratefully at Villefort, "to be examined by such a man as you, for this envious person is a real enemy." And by the rapid glance that the young man's eyes shot forth, Villefort saw how much energy lay hid beneath this mildness. "Now," said the deputy, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man to another who takes an interest in him. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter?" And Villefort drew disdainfully on his desk the letter Dantès had just given back to him. "None at all. I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercédès, by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, "If Renée could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, and would no longer call me a decapitator. Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with a brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, and he was so anxious to arrive at Elba that he would not touch at any other port, his disorder rose to such a height that at the end of the 3rd day, feeling he was dying, he called me to him. 'My dear Dantès,' said he, 'swear to perform what I am going to tell you, for it is a matter of the deepest importance.' 'I swear, captain,' replied I. 'Well, as after my death the command devolves on you as mate, assume the command and bear up for the island of Elba. Disembark at Porto Ferrajo. Ask for the Grand Marshal, give him this letter. Perhaps they will give you another letter, and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish what I was to have done, and derive all the honor and profit from it. I will do it, captain, but perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect. Here is a ring that will obtain audience of him, and remove every difficulty,' said the captain. At these words he gave me a ring. It was time. 2 hours after he was delirious. The next day he died." "And what did you do then?" "What I ought to have done, and what every one would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred, but with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the island of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everybody to remain on board, and went on shore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring I had received from the captain to him, and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and, as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry on to a person in Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade me to do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to Monsieur Morel, all the forms were got over. In a word, I was, as I told you, at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, had I not been arrested on this charge which you as well as I now see to be unjust." "Ah," said Villefort, "this seems to me the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was in obedience to the orders of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word you will appear should you be required, and go and rejoin your friends." "Am I free then, sir?" cried Dantès joyfully. "Yes, but first give me this letter. You have it already, for it was taken from me with some others which I see in that packet." "Stop a moment," said the deputy, as Dantès took his hat and gloves. "To whom is it addressed?" "To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coq-Héron, Paris." Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room, Villefort could not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat, and hastily turned over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. "Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coq-Héron, number 13," murmured he, growing still paler. "Yes," said Dantès. "Do you know him?" "No," replied Villefort. "A faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators." "It is a conspiracy, then?" asked Dantès, who, after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. "I have, however, already told you, sir, I was entirely ignorant of the contents of the letter." "Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed," said Villefort. "I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it." "Have you shown this letter to anyone?" asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. "To no one, on my honor." "Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the island of Elba, and addressed to Monsieur Noirtier?" "Everybody, except the person who gave it to me." "And that was too much, far too much," murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dantès with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. "Oh," said Dantès timidly, "what is the matter?" Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again perused the letter. "And you say that you are ignorant of the contents of this letter?" "I give you my word of honor, sir," said Dantès. "But what is the matter? You are ill. Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call?" "No," said Villefort, rising hastily. "Stay where you are. It is for me to give orders here, and not you." "Monsieur," replied Dantès proudly, "it was only to summon assistance for you." "I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me." Dantès waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back on his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and for the third time read the letter. "Oh, if he only knows the contents of this," murmured he, "and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost." And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. "Oh, it is impossible to doubt it," cried he suddenly. "In heaven's name," cried the unhappy young man, "if you doubt me, question me, I will answer you." Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. "Sir," said he, "I am no longer able, as I have hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial justice. What my own feelings is you already know." "Oh, monsieur," cried Dantès, "you have been rather a friend than a judge." "Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter, and you see." Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it was entirely consumed. "You see, I destroy it." "Oh," exclaimed Dantès, "you are goodness itself." "Listen," continued Villefort, "you can now have confidence in me after what I have done." "Oh, command, and I will obey." "Listen, this is not a command, but advice I give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should anyone else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter." "I promise." It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. "You see," continued he, glancing toward the grate, where fragments of burnt paper fluttered in the flames. The letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you therefore be questioned, deny all knowledge of it. Deny it boldly, and you are saved. Be satisfied. I will deny it. It was the only letter you had? It was. Swear it. I swear it. Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. Follow him, said Villefort to Dantès. Dantès saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself half fainting into a chair. Alas, alas, murmured he, if the procureur himself had been at Marseilles, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. Oh, my father, must your past career always interfere with my successes? Suddenly a light passed over his face, a smile played round his set mouth, and his haggard eyes were fixed in thought. This will do, said he, and from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now to the work I have in hand. And after having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. End of chapter 7.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Kristen Luoma, greenkri.com. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 8. The Chateau d'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes, who placed themselves one on Dante's right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palais de Justice was opened, and they went through a long range of gloomy corridors, whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palais de Justice communicated with the prison, a sombre edifice that from its grated windows looked on the clock tower of the Écoles. After numberless windings, Dante saw a door with an iron wicket. The commissary took up an iron mallet and knocked thrice, every blow seeming to Dante as if struck on his heart. The door opened, the two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance, therefore, did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of freedom. It was 4 o'clock when Dante was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him. But the sound died away, and Dante sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dante began to despair, steps were heard in the corridor. A key turned in the lock. The bolts creaked, and the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight Dante saw the glittering sabres and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at the sight of this display of force. "Are you come to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy procureur?" "I believe so." The conviction that they came from Monsieur de Villefort relieved all Dante's apprehensions. He advanced calmly and placed himself in the center of the escort. A carriage waited at the door, the coachman was on the box, and a police officer sat beside him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dante. "It is for you," replied the gendarme. Dante was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The two others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. He had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the grating, however, Dante saw they were passing through the Rue Cazerie, and by the Rue Saint-Laurent and the Rue Taremi to the port. Soon he saw the lights of La Conseigne. The carriage stopped. The officer descended, approached the guard-house. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dante saw the reflection of their muskets by the light of the lamps on the quay. "Can all this force be summoned on my account?" thought he. The officer opened the door, which was locked, and without speaking a word answered Dante's question. For he saw between the ranks of the soldiers a passage formed from the carriage to the port. The two gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarmes on each side of him followed his example. They advanced towards a boat, which a custom-house officer held by a chain near the quay. The soldiers looked at Dantès with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, while the officer stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly towards the Pilon. A shout from the boat. The chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were, as Dantès knew, in the Frioul, outside the inner harbour. The prisoner's first feeling was of a joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom. But he soon sighed, for he passed before La Réserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now through the open windows came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dante folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. The boat continued her voyage. They had passed the Tête de Mort, were now off the Anse de Faro, and about to double the battery. This maneuver was incomprehensible to Dante. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will soon know." But still, we are forbidden to give you any explanation." Dante, trained in discipline, knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates, who were forbidden to reply, and so he remained silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel at anchor outside the harbour. He thought, perhaps, they were going to leave him on some distant point. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handcuff him. This seemed good augury. Besides, had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Noirtier, he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort in his presence destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striving to pierce through the darkness. They had left the Île Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood, on the right, and were now opposite the Point des Catalans. It seemed to the prisoner that he should distinguish a feminine form on the beach, for it was there Mercédès dwelt. How was it that a presentiment did not warn Mercédès that her lover was within 300 yards of her? One light alone was visible, and Dante saw that it came from Mercédès' chamber. Mercédès was the only one awake in the whole settlement. A loud cry could be heard by her, but pride restrained him, and he did not utter it. What would his guards think if they had heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner thought only of Mercédès. An intervening elevation of land hid the light. Dante turned and perceived that they had gone out to sea. While he had been absorbed in thought, they had shipped their oars and hoisted sail. The boat was now moving with the wind. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dante turned to the nearest gendarme, and, taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you, as a Christian and a soldier, to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dante, a loyal Frenchman, though accused of treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise you, on my honor, I will submit to my fate." The gendarme looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for an answer a sign that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now." The gendarme replied, "You are a native of Marseilles and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you are going?" "On my honor, I have no idea." "Have you no idea whatever?" "None at all." "That is impossible." "I swear to you it is true. Tell me, I entreat." "But my orders." "Your orders do not forbid you telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour, or an hour. You see I cannot escape, even if I intended." "Unless you are blind, or have never been outside the harbor, you must know." "I do not." "Look round you, then." Dante rose and looked forward, when he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stands the Château d'If. This gloomy fortress, which has for more than 300 years furnished food for so many wild legends, seemed to Dante like a scaffold to a malefactor. "The Château d'If?" cried he. "What are we going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I am not going there to be imprisoned," said Dante. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrates or judges at the Château d'If?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, come, do not look so astonished, or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature." Dante pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. "You think, then," said he, "that I am taken to the Château d'If to be imprisoned there?" "It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard." "Without any inquiry, without any formality?" "All the formalities have been gone through. The inquiry is already made." "And so, in spite of M. de Villefort's promises?" "I do not know what M. de Villefort promised you," said the gendarme, "but I know we are taking you to the Château d'If." "But what are you doing? Help! Comrades, help!" By a rapid movement which the gendarme's practiced eye had perceived, Dante sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea. But 4 vigorous arms seized him as his feet quitted the bottom of the boat. He fell back, cursing with rage. "Good," said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. "Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Hark ye, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second. And if you move, I will blow your brains out." And he leveled his carbine at Dante, who felt the muzzle against his temple. For a moment, the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and of so ending the unexpected evil that had overtaken him. But he bethought him of M. de Villefort's promises, and besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too terrible. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth and wringing his hands with fury. At this moment the boat came to a landing with a violent shock. One of the sailors leaped on shore. A cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dante guessed they were at the end of the voyage, and that they were mooring the boat. His guards, taking him by the arms and coat-collar, forced him to rise, and dragged him towards the steps that led to the gate of the fortress, while the police officer, carrying a musket with fixed bayonet, followed behind. Dante made no resistance. He was like a man in a dream. He saw soldiers drawn up on the embankment. He knew vaguely that he was ascending a flight of steps. He was conscious that he passed through a door, and that the door closed behind him, but all this indistinctly as through a mist. He did not even see the ocean, that terrible barrier against freedom which the prisoners look upon with utter despair. They halted for a minute, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a court surrounded by high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels, and as they passed before the light, he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upwards of 10 minutes. Certain Dante could not escape, the gendarmes released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders came. "Where is the prisoner?" said a voice. "Here," replied the gendarmes. Let him follow me. I will take him to his cell." "Go," said the gendarmes, thrusting Dante forward. The prisoner followed his guide, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp placed on a stool illumined the apartment faintly, and showed Dante the features of his conductor, an under-jailer, ill-clothed, and of sullen appearance. "Here is your chamber for tonight," said he. "It is late, and the governor is asleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, he may change you. In the meantime there is bread, water, and fresh straw, and that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night." And before Dante could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or the water, before he glanced towards the corner where the straw was, the jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp and closing the door, leaving stamped upon the prisoner's mind the dim reflection of the dripping walls of his dungeon. Dante was alone in darkness and in silence, cold as the shadows that he felt breathe on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of day, the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dante where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dante appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmund started. "Have you not slept?" said the jailer. "I do not know," replied Dante. The jailer stared. "Are you hungry?" continued he. "I do not know." "Do you wish for anything?" "I wish to see the governor." The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dante followed him with his eyes and stretched forth his hands toward the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. He cast himself on the ground, weeping bitterly, and asking himself what crime he had committed that he was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food, but walked round and round the cell like a wild beast in his cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely that, during his journey hither, he had sat so still, whereas he might a dozen times have plunged into the sea, and, thanks to his powers of swimming for which he was famous, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercedes and his father could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he should live. Good seamen are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan and Spanish like a Castilian. He would have been free and happy with Mercedes and his father, whereas now he was confined in the Château d'If, that impregnable fortress, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercedes. And all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dante threw himself furiously down on his straw. The next morning, at the same hour, the jailer came again. "Well," said the jailer, "are you more reasonable today?" Dante made no reply. "Come, cheer up. Is there anything that I can do for you?" "I wish to see the governor." "I have already told you, it is impossible." "Why so?" "Because it is against prison rules, and prisoners must not even ask for it." "What is allowed, then?" "Better fare, if you pay for it, books, and leave to walk about." "I do not want books. I am satisfied with my food, and do not care to walk about. But I wish to see the governor." "If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat." "Well, then," said Edmund, "if you do not, I shall die of hunger, that is all." The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 10 sous a day to his jailer, he replied in a more subdued tone, "What you ask is impossible, but if you are very well behaved you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair." "But," asked Dante, "how long shall I have to wait?" "A month, 6 months, a year." It is too long a time. I wish to see him at once." "Ah," said the jailer, "do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight." "You think so?" "Yes, we have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 francs to the governor for his liberty that an abbé became mad, who is in this chamber before you." "How long has he left it?" 2 years." "Was he liberated then?" "No, he was put in a dungeon." "Listen," said Dante. "I am not an abbé. I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I will make you another offer." "What is that?" "I do not offer you 1,000,000 because I have it not. But I will give you 100 crowns if, the first time you go to Marseille, you will seek out a young girl named Mercedes at the Catalans and give her 2 lines from me. If I took them and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. "Well," said Dante, "mark this. If you refuse at least to tell Mercedes I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter I will dash out your brains with this stool." "Threats!" cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. "You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will be like him, mad enough to tie up, but fortunately there are dungeons here." Dante whirled the stool round his head. All right," said the jailer, "all right. Since you will have it so, I will send word to the governor." "Very well," returned Dante, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out, and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. "By the governor's orders," said he, "conduct the prisoner to the tier beneath." "To the dungeon, then," said the corporal. "Yes, we must put the madman with the madmen." The soldiers seized Dante, who followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of a dungeon was opened, and he was thrust in. The door closed, and Dante advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He then sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dante wanted but little of being utterly mad. End of chapter 8.
This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 9. The Evening of the Betrothal. Villefort had, as we have said, hastened back to Madame de Saint-Méran's in the Place de Grandcour, and on entering the house found that the guests whom he had left at table were taking coffee in the salon. Renée was, with all the rest of the company, anxiously awaiting him, and his entrance was followed by a general exclamation. "Well, Decapitator, guardian of the state, royalist, Brutus, what is the matter?" said one. "Speak out." "Are we threatened with a fresh reign of terror?" asked another. "Has the Corsican ogre broken loose?" cried a third. "Marquise," said Villefort, approaching his future mother-in-law, "I request your pardon for thus leaving you. Will the Marquis honor me by a few moments' private conversation?" "Ah, it is really a serious matter, then?" asked the Marquis, remarking the cloud on Villefort's brow. "So serious that I must take leave of you for a few days. So," added he, turning to Renée, "judge for yourself if it be not important." "You're going to leave us?" cried Renée, unable to hide her emotion at this unexpected announcement. "Alas," returned Villefort, "I must." "Where, then, are you going?" asked the Marquise. "That, madame, is an official secret, but if you have any commissions for Paris, a friend of mine is going there to-night, and will with pleasure undertake them." The guests looked at each other. "You wish to speak to me alone?" said the Marquis. "Yes, let us go to the library, please." The Marquis took his arm, and they left the salon. "Well," asked he, as soon as they were by themselves, "tell me what it is." "An affair of the greatest importance that demands my immediate presence in Paris. Now excuse the indiscretion, Marquis, But have you any landed property?" "All my fortune is in the funds, 700 or 800,000 francs." "Then sell out, Marquis, or you will lose it all." "But how can I sell out here?" "You have a broker, have you not?" "Yes." "Then give me a letter to him, and tell him to sell out without an instant's delay. Perhaps even now I shall arrive too late." "The deuce you say!" replied the Marquis. "Let us lose no time, then." And sitting down, he wrote a letter to his broker, ordering him to sell out at the market price. "Now then," said Villefort, placing the letter in his pocket-book, "I must have another." "To whom?" "To the king." "To the king?" "Yes." "I dare not write to his Majesty." "I do not ask you to write to his Majesty, but ask Monsieur de Servieux to do so. I want a letter that will enable me to reach the king's presence without all the formalities of demanding an audience. That would occasion a loss of precious time." "But address yourself to the Keeper of the Seals. He has the right of entry at the Tuileries, and can procure you audience at any hour of the day or night." "Doubtless, but there is no occasion to divide the honors of my discovery with him. The keeper would leave me in the background, and take all the glory to himself. I tell you, Marquis, my fortune is made if I only reach the Tuileries the first, for the king will not forget the service I do him. In that case, go and get ready. I will call Servieux and make him write the letter. Be as quick as possible. I must be on the road in a quarter of an hour. Tell your coachman to stop at the door." "You will present my excuses to the Marquise and Mademoiselle Renée, whom I leave on such a day with great regret." "You will find them both here, and can make your farewells in person." "A thousand thanks. And now for the letter." The Marquis rang. A servant entered. "Say to the Comte de Servieux that I would like to see him." "Now then, go," said the Marquis. "I shall be gone only a few moments." Villefort hastily quitted the apartment, but reflecting that the sight of the deputy procureur running through the streets would be enough to throw the whole city into confusion, he resumed his ordinary pace. At his door he perceived a figure in the shadow that seemed to wait for him. It was Mercédès, who, hearing no news of her lover, had come unobserved to inquire after him. As Villefort drew near, she advanced and stood before him. Dante had spoken of Mercédès, and Villefort instantly recognized her. Her beauty and high bearing surprised him, and when she inquired what had become of her lover, it seemed to him that she was the judge and he the accused. "The young man you speak of," said Villefort abruptly, "is a great criminal, and I can do nothing for him, mademoiselle." Mercédès burst into tears, and as Villefort strove to pass her, again addressed him. "But at least tell me where he is, that I may know whether he is alive or dead," said she. "I do not know. He is no longer in my hands," replied Villefort. And desirous of putting an end to the interview, he pushed by her and closed the door, as if to exclude the pain he felt. But remorse is not thus banished. Like Virgil's wounded hero, he carried the arrow in his wound, and arrived at the salon, Villefort uttered a sigh that was almost a sob, and sank into a chair. Then the first pangs of an unending torture seized upon his heart. The man he sacrificed to his ambition, that innocent victim immolated on the altar of his father's faults, appeared to him pale and threatening, leading his affianced bride by the hand and bringing with him remorse, not such as the ancients figured, furious and terrible, but that slow and consuming agony whose pangs are intensified from hour to hour up to the very moment of death. Then he had a moment's hesitation. He had frequently called for capital punishment on criminals, and owing to his irresistible eloquence they had been condemned, and yet the slightest shadow of remorse had never clouded Villefort's brow, because they were guilty, at least he believed so. But here was an innocent man, whose happiness he had destroyed. In this case he was not the judge, but the executioner. As he thus reflected, he felt the sensation we have described, and which had hitherto been unknown to him, arise in his bosom, and fill him with vague apprehensions. It is thus that a wounded man trembles instinctively at the approach of the finger to his wound, until it be healed. But Villefort's was one of those that never close, or if they do, only close to reopen more agonizing than ever. If at this moment the sweet voice of Renée had sounded in his ears pleading for mercy, or the fair Mercédès had entered and said, "In the name of God, I conjure you to restore me my affianced husband," his cold and trembling hands would have signed his release. But no voice broke the stillness of the chamber, and the door was opened only by Villefort's valet, who came to tell him that the travelling carriage was in readiness. Villefort rose, or rather sprang from his chair, hastily opened one of the drawers of his desk, emptied all the gold it contained into his pocket, stood motionless an instant, his hand pressed to his head, muttering a few inarticulate sounds, and then, perceiving that his servant had placed his cloak upon his shoulders, he sprang into the carriage, ordering the postilions to drive to M. de Saint Méran's. The hapless Dante was doomed. As the Marquis had promised, Villefort found the Marquise and Renée in waiting. He started when he saw Renée, for he fancied she was again about to plead for Dante. Alas, her emotions were wholly personal. She was thinking only of Villefort's departure. She loved Villefort, and he left her at the moment he was about to become her husband. Villefort knew not when he should return, and Renée, far from pleading for Dante, hated the man whose crime separated her from her lover. Meanwhile, what of Mercédès? She had met Fernand at the corner of the Rue de la Loge. She had returned to the Catalans, and had despairingly cast herself on her couch. Fernand, kneeling by her side, took her hand, and covered it with kisses, that Mercédès did not even feel. She passed the night thus. The lamp went out for want of oil, but she paid no heed to the darkness, and dawn came, but she knew not that it was day. Grief had made her blind to all but one object. That was Edmond. "Ah, you are there," said she, at length, turning towards Fernand. "I have not quitted you since yesterday," returned Fernand sorrowfully. M. Morel had not readily given up the fight. He had learned that Dante had been taken to prison, and he had gone to all his friends and the influential persons of the city. But the report was already in circulation that Dante was arrested as a Bonapartist agent, and as the most sanguine looked upon any attempt of Napoleon to remount the throne as impossible. He met with nothing but refusal, and had returned home in despair, declaring that the matter was serious, and that nothing more could be done. Caderousse was equally restless and uneasy, but instead of seeking, like M. Morel, to aid Dante, he had shut himself up with 2 bottles of black currant brandy, in the hope of drowning reflection. But he did not succeed, and became too intoxicated to fetch any more drink, and yet not so intoxicated as to forget what had happened. With his elbows on the table, he sat between the 2 empty bottles, while spectres danced in the light of the unsnuffed candle. Spectres such as Hoffmann strews over his punch-drunk pages, like black, fantastic dust. Danglars alone was content and joyous. He had got rid of an enemy, and made his own situation on the Pharaon secure. Danglars was one of those men born with a pen behind the ear and an inkstand in place of a heart. Everything with him was multiplication or subtraction. The life of a man was to him of far less value than a numeral, especially when, by taking it away, he could increase the sum total of his own desires. He went to bed at his usual hour, and slept in peace. Villefort, after receiving M. de Saveur's letter, embraced Renée, kissed the Marquise's hand, and shaken that of the Marquis, started for Paris along the Aix road. Old Dante was dying with anxiety to know what had become of Edmond, but we know very well what had become of Edmond. End of chapter 9.